Hi, everybody. This is David Zier. You're watching Breaking Point. We had a great show today. We just had Corey Lewandowski. We had the co-founder of Greenpeace on, who's a really wise guy. Right now, I'm really honored to have with us Mark Mix. He's the president of the National Right to Work Committee. It's a 2.8 million member public policy organization. There's so many issues here, like the XL pipeline and, issues that involve unions. Mark Mix, welcome to the show.
David, good to be with you again. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about these important issues for sure.
Yeah, they're really important. I wanted to ask you, I'm not a big union guy. The municipal unions have a stranglehold in the Northeast, in New York. Our taxes are through the roof. We can't afford this pension system. It's not really a Democrat-Republican issue because both parties have their, involved with the unions. And, they're making 2.5 times what the public makes per capita when you include their benefits. And it's really out of control. But private unions, not against them. Blue Dog Democrats voted for Reagan and Trump, the Boilermakers, the coal workers, the frackers. So in a nutshell, I have a lot of friends who work for Amazon, and they're kind of unhappy about the way they're driven and pushed. Do they need a union?
Well, they're going to decide, David. They're going to have a chance to exercise their rights under our federal labor policy to choose whether or not they want a union to speak for them with their employer. I mean, the interesting part about the Bessemer, Alabama facility is that it's in a right-to-work state. So one thing that cannot happen in Alabama in that contract, if the union members or if the workers there decide to join a union and have them speak for them with their employer, is they can't be compelled to pay dues or fees. Hopefully, obviously, the election's gone on for like a month and a half, and the president's he has chimed in on behalf of the union here. I mean, they're going to make the decision themselves, and that's what the unionization ought to be about. If an employer is not taking care of his employees, guess what? They can organize and they can get to come together and they can amplify their voice through unionization. We're not sure if that's going to happen. I think the deadline for closing the vote is March 29th. Just a couple of days away, and then they'll decide whether or not the union's going to represent them. If they do, well, then unfortunately, because of federal labor law, every single worker, even those that voted no, even those that didn't want a union, didn't ask for a union, didn't sign a card to get a union election, those folks, unfortunately, are going to be forced into this collective that's going to speak for them when, in fact, they won't have the ability to speak for themselves in unionization. But the fact that it's in a right-to-work state means they can't be forced to pay fees or dues to keep their jobs. They won't be fired if the union is certified and they don't pay dues to the union. That's the good news. Now, obviously, it's their employees' decision about what they're going to do, whether they're going to be unionized or not. But, frankly, if that's their decision, then we're okay with that. We're not okay with the idea that they're forced into this union monopoly, and we're okay with the fact that they're not going to be forced to pay dues or fees to keep their jobs. But it's an interesting question, and one that the unions think is a seminal issue as they go forward trying to organize workers across the country in Amazon.
Well, that's what really bothers me about the unions. Like if I don't want to join, I shouldn't be happy. And then they support candidates that most of the union members don't support. Like how was the head of the XL pipeline guys? They voted for they supported Joe Biden, and now they screwed themselves, right? So are you saying because it's in Alabama, they might have the right to not be in the union if Amazon unionizes?
Well, that's correct. I mean, David, going back to 1963, a U.S. Supreme Court case called General Motors, workers can no longer be forced to basically formally join a union as a condition of employment. From 1935, 1947 to 1963, you could be compelled to join a private organization or lose your job. The Supreme Court in 1963 said, that's probably a bridge too far. We're going to force workers to pay up to 100% of dues to keep their job, but we're not going to force them to join a union formally. So from that period going forward, you could be forced to pay 100% of dues to keep your job. But in the 27 states that have right to work laws, you cannot be fired if you don't tender dues or fees to the union. So that's what the basic protections of the right to work laws that are in place in 27 states mean. Alabama is one of those states. So when the union is negotiating a contract, if they do win the election at the Amazon facility down there, they can't say, one of the first things unions say in non-right to work states is, okay, everyone's got to pay union dues or you have to fire them. Everyone's got to have their dues checked off from their paycheck or you're going to fire them. This is kind of the power that union officials use. And David, you refer back to the Keystone XL pipeline. I mean, the fact is, you're right. the big bosses of the union, of the pipe fitters union and the operating engineers union and the LIUNA union and the building trades unions, all endorsed Joe Biden, even though he said back in May of 2020, before the election, that if he was elected, he was going to deauthorize the permit to operate and continue construction of the XL pipeline. And on the first day of his presidency, he signed that executive order and literally put thousands of union members on the unemployment line. I mean, how's that for representation? And in those states that don't have right to work, they were forced to pay for that. It's outrageous.
I'm really perplexed about this fact that you have to pay the dues anyway. That goes to candidates that you despise, even though you're not in the union. That's crazy. That's crazy. How does that get changed?
Well, it gets through because back in 1935, when President Roosevelt then decided to use the economic crisis to basically dramatically expand the federal government, they put this into statute under what's called the Wagner Act at the time, even though basically the same legislation was ruled unconstitutional in 1933. The Supreme Court was, quote, encouraged by Roosevelt, by basically threatening to pack the court with 6 new justices at the time to make this federal encroachment on labor policy constitutional. They did that in 1935. And that law said that you could be forced to formally join an organization in order to work. And that membership, quote unquote, of formal unionization or formal membership came with the notion that you would pay dues or you would lose your job. So the federal government's the one that imposes this on the entire country. Like in New York State, for example, where I grew up, there's no law that says private sector workers have to pay union dues or fees on the New York State statute book. They come from the federal government. The federal government imposed this forced unionism on America back in 1935 and 1937 when the Supreme Court ruled it constitutional. In 1947, when they realized they'd gone way too far, given union officials way too much power, they tried to reform that act with the Taft-Hartley Act of 47. And in 47, they allowed states to pass now what are known as right-to-work laws. But it was a federal government privilege, David. That's the interesting part about this. So now we have a bill pending in the United States Senate that passed the House 2 weeks ago that would repeal all those right-to-work laws across the country and go back to the federally forced regime of forcing workers to pay union dues or fees to keep their jobs, or they would be fired.
Yeah, so I have a good friend who works for Amazon down in Florida, and they drive him pretty hard, and I don't know what the solution is. Are there attempts around other states to unionize Amazon?
Well, I think so. I think this kind of Bessemer, Alabama plant is kind of the keystone of the union officials' drive to unionize Amazon. But here's what we know, David, and this is basic common sense. If an employer is not taking care of their employees, this will happen. And I'm not sure what the situation is inside the distribution warehouses at Amazon. Whether if they're not taking care of their employees, they will join together voluntarily to amplify their voice. And the way they would do it under federal law is this unionization. The problem with it, though, comes with this monopoly that they're going to grant this particular union if they vote for them, and that they will now become the single voice in the workplace for everybody, all 5,000 workers down there at the Bessemer facility. No one else can speak to the employer. No one else can speak about their terms and conditions of employment except the union. So if you voted no, if the vote passes by one vote, then everyone who voted no is now into this union collective. That's kind of a violation of the freedom of association. We've made that claim in the U.S. Supreme Court on behalf of public sector workers, and we basically have won it with a case that allowed all government employees across the United States to basically say, I can't be compelled to pay dues or fees to the union to keep my job for government. That was a case called the Janus decision back in 2018 that we litigated here at the Right to Work Foundation, our sister organization, and basically gave the right to work to every government employee in America. Those protections, unfortunately, don't exist for private sector workers like those in the non-right to work states that would be at Amazon that could be compelled, if unionized, not only to accept the union as their monopoly bargaining agent, but also to pay dues or fees to keep their job.
Yeah, I'm in commercial and residential construction in New York, and I've been doing it for 33 years. And all of my subs and all of our subs for my clients get paid. And if they don't like it, they go to another job. And it's like, I don't want somebody telling me what to do. I really have a problem with that because we treat everybody with respect, and you don't have to work for us. You know what I mean? So the concept bothers me, but I understand. And a long time ago, it was probably a big need for all these places to have some representation. All right, Mark Mix, I want to thank you so much for joining us. We'll stay tuned for this battle that's going on, and we can have you back to discuss it, all right?
Glad to do it, David. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good. It's a big issue and it's important. So we want our people to be safe and represented also, but it's got to be within reason. So thank you so much, Mark. Everybody, Mark Mitch, the president of the National Right to Work Committee, and we'll be right back. Thank you for joining us.